So, Malcolm, it's good to finally get you on the chair. Usually, to start it off, Citywide Stories was you behind the camera, capturing a lot of the great stories around Citywide. And so today, it's good to be able to hear a bit about your story and God's journey for you. For those that maybe don't know you as well, what's a summary of your time here at Citywide?
Well, Dan, I came to Citywide in the early 90s, about 28 years ago. And I was here for a few years before taking a couple of years off to work in the Northern Territory. And then I returned to quite a different church after that. But during my time here, I've had the privilege of being on the eldership a couple of times. I've been involved in a number of drama productions, which were a hallmark of the church in those years. Was a youth leader for a while, and more recently served in some of the technical aspects of the church, and also currently leading a life group.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I appreciate you putting your hand up to go on the sound desk and learn that again. And so, definitely a man of many talents. And so we've been doing this series on focusing on Jesus and next steps, looking at to reflect, recognise, choose and act. What's God been saying to you through that, maybe even these last couple of years as you reflect on it?
Well, the reflecting really started when Matt challenged us to embrace Neighbourhood Day. Mm-hmm. And while it wasn't part of the council I live in, it still seemed an important thing to do. And for the first year, I probably ignored it. And then in the second year, I started to look at the neighbours and the area in which I lived. And I've been there for the same length of time I've been here at Citywide. But I hadn't really got to know the neighbours other than the casual hello and the occasional conversation. But then I really felt the Lord saying, you need to be part of your neighbourhood and to know your neighbours. And so I began that process. And it's really led to some good relationships, mowing lawns and meals and all sorts of things are happening now which are really good. And then from there, Matt challenged us while I was on the eldership to read Francis Chan's book, Letters to the Church. And it was a great book to read, but then the eldership went down the underground church model because we thought that was the way the Lord could better use this church and the people in it. But I had a reason to come back to that book, and in recent times I read it with our life group. We looked at Francis Chan and the model that was presented in that and wondered what we could do. Well, for me it was what could I do, and so that reflection led me back to how can I be more involved in the local community in which I live. And so to that end, I really feel the Lord is leading me to be part of a church that's within my local community. And I came up with the parameter that it had to be within a 5-minute drive.
Yep.
And I looked around at the churches and suddenly the Lord reminded me, there's a Baptist church there, for goodness sake. So I've decided that I'm going to become part of the Claremont Baptist Church community. It's only a 3-minute drive from where I live. And it will further, I think, give me the opportunity to develop relationships in a broader sense with a bit wider a community, not just the immediate neighbours, and fulfil the calling which I think God has for me to continue to serve Him in that way, in that area.
Yeah, no, it's encouraging to see you go through that process and to make such a big decision, which of course we're going to be sad to see you go in that way, but of course it's still in the neighbourhood or next neighbourhood over, aren't you? So we know it's not a total goodbye, but you mentioned there kind of stepping into your calling and as you've come into this acting out what you've really reflected on. what would you encourage other people, to do?
I'd encourage people to go through this very process of just reflecting on where they're at, particularly at their stage of life, which it was for me, because now that I'm 72, I'm getting on, and I've got to think that in the coming years I may not always be as mobile and active as I am now, and therefore being part of a local community, particularly from the point of view of a church and a shopping centre and all those things, are increasingly becoming more important for me. But for others, regardless of where they're at, maybe find the passion that God has placed in their hearts and on their lives, and using that perhaps as a starting point for finding out the calling that God has for them.